Okay, so today's class is gonna be about the difference between blind memorization and visual memorization. So this categorization is actually something that I created myself, and it's based on the idea that some memory methods are based on imagination. So you try to visualize things using your imagination, and other methods they are not. They are not based on that. Don't use that. So some methods are just blind. Let's say you guys probably know about acronyms, like the idea of using acronyms to memorize things. So you can. That's an example of what I would call blind memorization. You don't imagine something, but I think all you guys are probably familiar with this type of thing, like having a song to remember a sequence or a formula. So this is what I would call blind memorization. But we are also in this course going to learn about a lot of methods that involve visualizing things. So you're going to memorize something by visualizing, by converting that into an image. But since blind memorization is simpler to understand, I'm going to start with them. And here we have, so blind memorization, no mental imagery. Visual memorization, you have mental imagery that's used to represent the content. So some examples of methods, if you guys want to search later, I'm going to cover all of them today. So we're going to have, not all of them today, but in the course. And all the blind methods I'm going to cover today. So we have repetition. We already looked at repetition in the previous lecture. So we have like spaced repetition, which we use in Anki in the app. So we review information in increasing amount in intervals of time. So we have repetition, we have acronyms, we have chunking, and we have logic. So I'm gonna cover them soon. And for the visual methods, we have like keyword method, which is very useful for like language learning. So if you're trying to learn another language, you can use that. The memory palace method is like the biggest, the most powerful memory method that exists. And that's the one pretty much all memory champions use in memory competitions. The major system is a method to memorize numbers. If you guys are interested in memorizing numbers for, let's say, MCAT or anything like that, or if you're memorizing law, that can be important because you need a system to retain numbers so you don't get confused. Like you don't confuse like 3 with 7 when you're learning something. PAO is just an extension of the major system, basically, for you to memorize even longer numbers in a faster way. Okay, so let's cover repetition. So we can implement that to anything. So repetition is the most basic method that exists for memorization, and you can use it to memorize pretty much anything, absolutely anything. You can just repeat your phone number, you can just repeat names, you can just repeat text to yourself, and you will eventually remember. And however, there are ways to do it effectively and ways to do it ineffectively. So you could, for instance, if you want to learn your phone number, you can just repeat the phone number to yourself, but that's not very effective. Um, one way you can do it better, more effectively, would be to implement active recall and spaced repetition. So, for instance, if you're trying to memorize your phone number through repetition, you could, let's say, uh, through active recall, you read the phone number and then you cover it and then you try to recall. So that recalling that's done without seeing the number is called active recall because you're doing the you're using your own mental capacity to remember that content. You're doing that let's say force or strength to actually trying to remember that from your own memory, to recall that from your memory. Spaced repetition is the idea that you review in spaced intervals of time. You can use Anki for that. So that makes repetition much more effective. So if you're gonna use repetition, you gotta implement these two so that you spend less time and you do it effectively. I'm gonna cover more methods to use repetition later in the course. Although this is very primitive, like repetition is very, very primitive, there are methods that use it so effectively that it can actually become worth it. So for instance, memorization of texts. We're gonna see how we can memorize texts or even books if you're interested in. But yeah, we're gonna cover like this type of thing in the lecture about text memorization. But let's move on to acronyms since we already covered repetition in the previous lectures and we're going to cover it in the future as well, let's move on to acronyms. So who here knows the coordinating conjunctions? Does anyone here know all of them? Nobody? So who here remember the phrase fanboys? Yeah, some people remember it. So what is fanboys? Yes, perfect. So exactly. That's a very common acronym that's used to remember the coordinating conjunctions. I mean, the name coordinating conjunctions may not have brought up the acronym in itself, but possibly if you had the right trigger, you would remember the acronym. So that's very common to be taught in English classes. I learned it this way, so I learned like the fanboys acronym. And what this does is that you pick a lot of information and you condense it in such a way that it becomes very easy to remember. So acronyms can be very powerful simply because you can memorize a whole list by picking the first letter of each item and forming a word. And in this case, you can change the order of the words until you find a word that actually can represent all the list. So if you want to memorize if you wanted to memorize this list, you would just pick, if you didn't know fanboys before, you could just pick the first letter of each word and play around trying to form a word with the first letters until you can find an acronym that matches. Okay? That's one method. If you want to be quick, if you see that, well, I want to memorize a list that's very quick, it's very short, acronyms can be useful. So that's something for your toolkit. By the way, the methods that I'm going to show today, I'm going to show a bunch of methods. The idea is you're going to have like a bunch of methods in your toolkit, but I'm not going to be showing so much exercises for this one, for the blind methods. I'm going to be showing more exercise for the visual methods, okay? So, but this is also useful. What is the problem with acronyms? Actually, let me show another example. So we have here. Actually, let's try to work on this one. Sean, you need to know this one. You need to know this formula. So actually, let's try to work an example with this one. So acronyms, they don't necessarily need to make sense. So fanboys, I mean, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything, but like it doesn't need to relate to anything. But insofar as you can say it, it makes it very easy. So how would you memorize this formula, for instance, in a way that you can implement through implementing acronyms? So any ideas about that? You could. I was thinking of a word. So it doesn't have any meaning, but like if I try to read the formula, MVPY, it's like I can't say it. But if I change the order of things, maybe I can say them. Like obviously these two need to be together because it's an equation, but if I swap this with this, for instance, it's still the same thing. Like if it's py equals m times v, it's like I would read like piv, like this, for instance. You get the idea of, so you can memorize things that way. What does piv mean? Nothing, absolutely nothing. But I use that to memorize this formula, and it's quick. I mean, you don't need to use advanced methods all the time. Sometimes you just use something very silly that doesn't mean anything. But because it's just a sound, it's like ping. It's very easy to remember. You just think, oh, ping. And what is ping? You try to you ask yourself, what is ping? P-Y-M-V. And if you study the content, you would know that M refers to money supply. You know that V refers to velocity of money, P to price level, Y to real GDP, simply because in the class, you're going to have a lot of exposure to these ideas. So you don't need to memorize what each thing means necessarily, insofar as you had enough exposure to the point that remembering one letter makes you remember the whole thing. So it's just normal that in economics, you see Y always representing real GDP. So you don't need to memorize why that Y means real GDP because you already know that from your own exposure to the material. So it does not. So an acronym does not need to make sense. Any questions so far? By the way, I feel like I'm going a little bit too fast, but it does not need to make any sense. And if you find an easy and short acronym, use it. Okay, basically, if you ever are trying to remember something and you can't find an acronym, use it. I really like them, but you also have to review them. So you still need to use Anki to review for everything you learn. What is the problem of acronyms? Like they are very effective, but they have one problem. Any guesses?
Well, you don't like know the full word. You just know like what to start with. Like the fanboys, like I don't know. I'm thinking like you still have to remember like that F is for four. Like,
Yeah, yeah. So that's one problem. So you're gonna remember only the first letter of each word. So if you can't remember that F refers to four, you're yeah. I'm sorry. It's over. Sure.
Would you say that just has to do with like exposure, like you were saying with economics, where it's like if you make an acronym but you can't remember the word, you probably just haven't actually used that like word very much?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, if you have a lot of exposure, you probably will remember the meaning of each letter. That is true. Um, but there's another problem with this as well, is that it doesn't scale well. So you can create an acronym for this, but like you're not gonna create an acronym with 20 letters, with 30 letters. So if you want to memorize something long, that's not gonna happen. And also, it's not applicable to everything. It's not always that you can generate that word. So it's very limited, and it's not scalable. It doesn't scale very well. But if you can find an acronym, use it. It's very great. So now let's move on to our next method, our next blind method, which is chunking, which is the idea that we can, if I want to memorize something, I can divide that into multiple blocks and memorize block by block. It is easier to memorize a bunch of blocks than to memorize a whole single sequence that's continuous. That's why phone numbers are divided the way they are. We don't have phone numbers written like this. Like that's awful. That's awful to read. That's awful to remember. It's awful to say. But when we chunk things, this is much easier to remember. So if you need to remember your phone number, you definitely should not look at your phone number this way, but you should break it down. And that works not just for phone numbers, but for pretty much anything. So when you divide something into smaller pieces, it makes it more digestible. But if you divide it too much, it gets as hard as initially, though. So if I move from this one, for instance, to this one, does everyone agree that it's easier to memorize this than this? Does that make sense? However, if I divide this so much that I just get digit by digit, then it's pretty much the same as before. So I can divide too much, but some division is good. So there's an equilibrium point. So now, first exercise for you guys actually to try. So you guys have to memorize this one, this sequence of digits. Can everybody see the sequence of digits using this idea? So you guys can start. I'm gonna give you guys some minutes. Try to use some pen or paper. So you guys are supposed to try to divide that into small blocks so that you get a sequence that makes sense to you. Like you try to find a way to break it down so that it becomes easy to remember. I'm gonna give like 3 minutes. When you finish memorizing it, close your eyes and try to recall it. Like write it down and see if you recalled it correctly. And if you manage to memorize it, raise your hands so you let me know. Okay. Can I move on and show some ideas to memorize, or do you guys want more time? More time? Okay, I'll move on then. So how can you memorize it? You can chunk it. So if you notice this, you could, let's say, if you divide the 0704, for instance, the beginning, you could maybe remember, well, That's the Declaration of Independence. So that's something easy to remember. So if you can chunk something into multiple parts and find meaning in each one of those, that can be very helpful. You have later, after 0704, you get 1787, and possibly, depending on your exposure to history, you may remember, well, that's the signing of the Constitution. If you get to 1865, which is the next one, you can remember, well, maybe remember that's the end of the Civil War. And when we go to the last one, 1945, maybe that reminds you of the end of the Second World War. So you can use chunking with repetition or with some explanation or logic. So you can divide it into multiple blocks and just repeat it to yourself. Like you hide it, try to repeat it. And just the fact that you divide it into multiple blocks already helps. But you can also implement some logic to make you remember it. Do you guys get it? So you can make chunking more powerful using these two ways. Who here managed to actually memorize it and recall it like correctly? So do you guys want to offer any ideas of how you divided it? I'm curious to know. Straswa, you raise your hand first.
First, I excluded the first 0, and then 704 is the area code for Charlotte, North Carolina. So I use that. And then I see that 178 and 718 are containing similar numbers, so I chunked those into 2 separate groups. And then 651 is part of my phone number. And then 045 is close to the end of my mom's phone number.
Okay. So, as you explained, I saw that you divided into multiple groups, and for each group you divided, there was some meaning related to you, right? You were relating each part of each chunk that you made, you related to something that connects to your own personal history. So that is a core thing of memorization, that you are always associating new knowledge to past knowledge. And that's what makes the memory easy to recall later. So you connect it to past knowledge, and then it becomes new knowledge. And that can make chunking much more powerful. Any other ideas of how people chunked it? Sean, you raise your hand.
Yeah, well, I broke it into like groups of 4, so I tried to like remember the 4 digits, and then I actually did remember that 1865 was like the end of slavery, Civil War, or whatever. And then I was like, okay, well, if I just add 80 to that, then I can get 1945. So I just like that's how I did those two. Then I don't know. I guess I just tried to memorize and recall. So 07. I didn't really link it to those things.
Okay, nice. So you also divided it, and you also saw meaning in some of it. So, yeah, that's great. That's great. Sure.
Yeah, for me, like there's also a pattern in soul. Like if you like memorize 0704, right? You see like the second digit, I divided into groups of 4, right? So in each group of 4, right, after 0704, there's more like an increment that's happening, like an increment of 1, 17, 18, 19. So like the only task that I have now is to just memorize 87, 65, and 45.
Great. That's very good. So you divided 4 by 4. You memorized this one, 0704. And here, 1787, 1865, and 1945, you increase 1 century each time. So you also can see patterns in the chunk to get, which is what I'm calling logic here. So you saw some logic behind the chunks, and that makes it better to memorize. That's great. That's great. So all these things, either logic through connecting to past experience or logic like in the pattern itself, all of it's helpful. All of it helps you memorize it. So that's one idea of doing it. Now let's move on to actually talk about logic as a technique to memorize things in its own for its own sake, on its own actually. So logic is basically the why of it. So it's the idea of finding an explanation or logic behind something that helps you remember it. So, for instance, if you know morphology, it makes it much easier for you to remember the words. And it always gets easier as your vocabulary increases. So if you're trying to memorize words for like medicine, if you know the meaning of each part of the word, it's easier for you to remember the meaning of the whole word. So let's analyze this table, for instance. So if you want to memorize this word, it makes much more sense for you to, instead of just memorize connecting the word to the meaning itself directly, oh, I'm just going to memorize that this word means that. You try to ask yourself, why does this word mean that? And you can break it down to each part of it. And if you memorize the meaning of each part of it, now you can know the meaning of all words that use those parts. So morphology is the study, is a branch of linguistics that concerns with the meaning of each part of words, basically. So here we have these two words, and I guess you guys have at least some exposure to it. Who here has some experience with this idea of, yeah. So I guess for things like med students, some Latin can always be helpful. And yeah, any thoughts about that? Any comments you guys would like to make about this idea of seeing logic behind things? Sure.
More of like a question. When I used to do chemistry, like this was super helpful, or biology, because if you remember like those small parts, yeah, it's much easier to remember what
Mm-hmm.
it means. But this doesn't necessarily work for every single thing. Like
It
there are
doesn't.
some like philosophical or like just English words that this also works for that aren't
Mm-hmm.
scientific. But can you only do this if it can be broken down, or is there like
Okay.
other ways
Okay.
as well?
That's a great question, because not all words make sense like this. Not all words receive their meaning by someone who was smart and sensible. Some people gave names to things when they shouldn't, and they were not capable. They were not sane enough to do that, and now everybody got to deal with that. So in that case, you can still implement logic, because you can always make it up. So you don't necessarily need to have something there. So let's give this example. This is very related to like myself, but like let's move on. So imagine we are studying biology and we are trying to learn that the photoreceptors we have, like cones are related to color, and the rods are responsible for like light only. And you could make the logic up. You could memorize that by saying, well, cones start the word cone starts with C, color, and rods. Well, it's light because well the cones are color already, so you can just like eliminate that. You can always make the logic up. But here's the thing. Any comments on that? Okay. I felt like you wanted to say something, but like, do you? Okay. Okay, sure. So you can just like make it up. But one thing that you could also think of is, and now I want to move to the visual part of things, to the visual memorization side. Any questions about this so far? Because I'm gonna start moving to another direction now. Any? Okay. So when I was in like middle school, I was studying this, and I remember I had this class, and I was talking to my friend, and I was like, oh, this is very easy to remember, because like I think of the word cone, and I think of like those orange cones, and that's so like bright and like colorful, and I can't. For me, like the sight of that image came to me very clearly, so it was very easy to associate cones to color. But my friend was like, Mike, you're so stupid. Like you should think, well, cones start with C, so C of color. Like, why are you doing this weird connection of of cone and imagining a cone and visualizing? Just think of the letter. And what happened is that we were just implementing different methods of it. So I was using a visual method, and he was using a logic method, right? And both work. But there is one difference between the method I used and the method that he was using. That his method does not scale well. So when 4 years later I was memorizing like thousands of digits of Euler's number, I could never try to use like logic to memorize all of that. I needed images. So images are what, in imagination, is what can unlock the full potential of your memory to the capacity that, to the point that you can memorize absolutely anything you want. And now I want to move to the most exciting part of the course, which is visual memorization. So my point is that visual memorization is simply the coolest thing that you guys are going to learn here. It's the idea that you got to let your imagination go free and not limit yourself. And for us to do that, I'm going to do an aphantasia test. So let's do a very quick test. So I want everybody to close their eyes. Okay, everybody close their eyes. Everybody. I want every single one to close their eyes. And I want you to try to imagine an apple. Just try to imagine an apple. A red apple. A normal red apple. So I want to ask, who here, do not open your eyes yet, who here cannot visualize anything? So who here is just black, pitch black? Okay. So now I want you guys to try to remember a time that you ate an apple. So remember a time that you ate an apple. Just you were in the kitchen, you were just biting into an apple. Can you see the memory in your head? Or is it still pitch black? If it's still pitch black, raise your hand. Okay. So you guys can open your eyes now. So here's the thing. What is this test that I'm trying to do with you guys? So there's this thing called aphantasia, and aphantasia is the idea that some people cannot visualize mental imagery. So you close your eyes, you try to imagine something, and nothing comes up. And many people who have aphantasia, they don't know that there is such a thing as mental imagery. So they don't know that there is such a thing as imagination. But it's also common for many people to not have a clear visualization in their head. So it can be hazy, like it can be foggy, it can be like difficult to see, like blurry. But it's also possible to like improve visualization. So if it was very blurry and you couldn't like play with the image well, there are methods to like improve visualization, to practice it, and to make it more vivid. But yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of how your visualization was going on. But you can still implement visual methods with even if you have aphantasia, like memory palace and stuff. But it is very interesting. Like some people don't see anything, but they implement visual methods, and I still don't understand how that works. But it's a very curious fact about psychology. But if you're having trouble visualizing anything, let me know. Okay. If you're having trouble, oh, it's too blurry, I can't see anything, let me know, and we're gonna walk through it. Okay? Is it okay? Fine. Okay, let's move on. So we have the principles of visualization. So the idea is that we can use these visualization memory methods to memorize whatever we want. And the first principle that we need to have when we are building our images is that emotion is key. So the images must have emotion, strong emotions. So weirdness, disgust, anger, lust, excitement, humor. So any feeling that you can bring to the image, any feeling whatsoever, the better. The more feeling it has, the better. If it's weird, if it's funny, if it's lustful, if it's something you can show on television, or else you would just be blocked. Anything that's absolutely like anything that's moves you. if an image moves you, it's memorable. Okay, so if you can imagine something that's memorable, that's emotional, it is going to be memorable. That's the one of the principles of visualization. So something that's going to be very hard in this course is to make you guys feel free to visualize anything you want, because kids don't have any limits. They imagine whatever they want. But as we grow up, we are told that some things are stupid and we shouldn't be thinking about them. And that is bad for memory, basically, because what I'm going to defend here is that you should let your imagination go free. And if something's like absolutely horrendous or extremely funny or extremely like something you could not tell to anybody, it means that it's a good image for you to use in your memory palace or in whatever you're trying to remember. So if you cannot tell that to someone, that means it's a good image. So the next principle is that interaction and movement makes stronger memories. We're going to cover that better later. So an image that has movement and interaction, so if you're trying to memorize something with multiple entities in it, it makes it better to remember it. And making cartoonish or distorting or breaking physics or biology makes it better. So if you want to remember, like if your image that you're using to memorize something is like an elephant and a rat, it is better to memorize like a gigantic rat and a tiny elephant. So you distort things that in reality you will not see things those ways. In interaction and movement, if you're memorizing an image that involves like two people, if you memorize just them standing here and the other person standing here, it's not as memorable as imagining one punching the other person's face or kicking them in the balls. That's more memorable. So, and that involves both emotion and interaction and movement. So that is something that is going to make that visualization, that imagination, that imagery more memorable. Any questions about this? Okay. I'm going to cover examples later. So this is just a very theoretical introduction. So some main mistakes, and I want to cover this before we move on, because I know you guys are going to make these, some of them at least, is that being afraid of your own creativity. So you do not need to tell other people what you're imagining, what you're thinking of. I'm not gonna force you to say, and I'm not gonna tell you guys either, because I'm gonna post that on YouTube, and that would make the video go down. And like when I memorized like all those thousands of digits, it sounds very boring for people who are outside listening to me reciting digits, and like it's very boring. It's super tedious. But like in my head, I'm seeing just this bunch of images, and they're like funny. And I would never tell people all the images. I can tell some of them, but like not all of them. But you don't need to. So you need to leave your creativity to flow, and don't be afraid of it. Kids are not afraid of their creativity, and you're not doing anything wrong. And just let it flow and create like funny or lustful or humorous images. And the more emotion, the better. Another thing is lack of interaction. It needs to have interaction. It needs to be active. It needs to have movement. And if you have two elements that are just separate, bring them together. Putting a lot of stuff in the same image, that's bad. Don't put a lot of images in the same. When we deal with the memory palace method, we are going to have like multiple positions, and we're going to put different things in each position. Don't put too many in the same position. Basically, the images need to be cleaner. Another thing is lack of vividness. And the idea for this is that if you're visualizing something and it's foggy, it's difficult, it's blurry, you can work your imagination and train it to make it better to visualize. So there are basically visualization exercises that you can do to improve it. So you can do like day after day. Your visualization is normal to improve. It is expected that it's going to improve. So when I started, for instance, I did this 1 or 2 weeks, I think, training to improve my visualization. I think I did this training like twice. It's something that I came up with. But the idea is just like every day I would spend like 5 to 15 minutes. I would just close my eyes and try to visualize. I would try to imagine as vividly as I could. And I would start with simple things, and I would try to increase. And I would try to like rotate things. I would try to make movements. So for instance, I would just imagine, let's say, a faucet, like a water dripping from a faucet. And initially, it's very hard to control things. Sometimes you want to make an image look like you're imagining a cartoon character. You're imagining Mickey Mouse. Okay, so you imagine Mickey. You guys are you guys imagining Mickey? Imagine Mickey with me. Um, what is Mickey doing? Say out loud. What is Mickey doing? Huh? Jumping? Okay, so I want you guys to try to make Mickey like just stand still. Is anyone having trouble with that? Just still, 100% still, not moving at all. Okay, now I want you guys to imagine Mickey doing a backflip. Is that doable? So now, here's the thing. For some people, and for me, for instance, it was very hard to control Mickey. Not just Mickey, but like any image, it can be very hard. And very often it's going to be very blurry. And you're just imagining the idea of Mickey. And you're not really imagining the shorts, the shoes, the ears, the eyes, the gloves. So in the beginning, it can lack vividness. But with time, you can improve that by like doing little by little and improving your imagination. So now let's move on from the theoretical part to the practical part. But before, any questions? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Okay. So now let's move on to memorize vocabulary. And this is called the keyword method. So the idea is that we can memorize vocabulary creating images to represent the words, what the meaning is. So we create a word for an image for the word and an image for the meaning. And we create a mental image. We imagine these two images together. So here we have the word pasto in Spanish, and that means grass. But it sounds a lot like pasta. So we pick the word. Let's say you're learning Spanish. You have the word pasto. Okay, you have the word pasto. And you have the meaning, which is grass. So you can visualize, you can convert pasto. You can ask yourself, what does the word pasto remind you of? What does it remind you of? It reminds you of grass, I would say. It reminds you of pasta. And so pasto reminds of pasta, which you can visualize, right? It's something you can see. And the meaning of it is grass, which you also can visualize. So you can memorize the word pasto by putting these two things together. So I want you guys to create an image of connecting pasta and grass so that you can memorize that the word pasto in Spanish means grass. How would you imagine that? I give you guys like 10 seconds. Think of an image that's implements all the ideas that I said. The fact that it's memorable, the fact that you gotta have emotion or movement or whatever. Try to think of something. Maybe weirdness, anything. I'm gonna give. Okay. You guys have 3 seconds. What did you guys think of? Anyone wants to share what they thought of? If you tell me that you thought of something that you can't say out loud, I'll feel very proud of you. But any ideas? Okay, sure, Sean.
I was thinking of like having a picnic in the grass eating pasta.
Okay. So I'll have my comments about that. And so, Owen, what did you think of?
I just thought of pasta grass. Like the grass is made out of pasta.
The grass is made of. Wait, is that a wait? Pasta grass, like the grass made of pasta. Like you went like.
I was imagining there's a big field and it's just pasta.
That's good. That's very good. I like it. Because it has weirdness. I really like. Yeah, I like it very much. So you see, if we bring it back, the main mistakes like being afraid of our own creativity, and that's one point. Let me go back here. The emotion. So we have all these emotions, and if you can bring them up, it's the better. So, for instance, the idea you can memorize just eating pasta in a picnic, but why not to imagine yourself eating pasta from like that's been thrown on the grass and you're eating pasta in grass? Why not imagine like your bowl of pasta has a lot of grass in it and you're just feeling the texture of the pasta and the grass and you're chewing both of them, and that's disgusting. But if you come back, disgust is one of the things that you can bring up. So if disgusting, it's memorable. Yeah, it can be good to memorize. And I really like the idea of imagine like um, pasta grass because it's weird. You're not. Here's the thing: if you have something that you're not gonna see on a daily basis, your brain is gonna notice that that's different. That's uh, memorable. So if it's something you can see anytime, so if it's something you're seeing on television, if it's something you can do in your daily on a daily basis, your memory is not gonna remember it. Your brain is not gonna remember it because it's normal. But if something that's not normal, your brain is gonna be, oh my god, I need to remember this. This is really unique. So let's do that to memorize that carta or carta in Portuguese means postal letter, but sounds like card. So carta is let's imagine you're learning Portuguese. Carta sounds like card, but it means postal letter. What are you guys gonna think of? So let's try to imagine something. Try to connect these two. So we're trying to connect the a card and a postal letter. Try to think of something funny, something weird, something lustful, something disgusting, whatever you would like to think of. I'm gonna give you guys some time. Any ideas? Okay. Who raised their hand first? Kitio.
It's not crazy, but it's exciting. But delivering postal letters in a wooden cart.
Delivering postal letters in a wooden cart. Okay. Okay. Cool. Any other ideas?
I thought of a giant like envelope that when you open it, it had a cart inside of it.
Okay. Cool. That's weird. That's nice. That's cartoonish. Okay. Any other ideas? I think the video is not gonna get your because the video is not gonna get your voice. I'm gonna will be repeating the things you guys thought of, by the way. So any other ideas? Sure.
Santa Claus in a cart just throwing letters.
Santa Claus in a car throwing letters. Okay. Any other ideas? Sure.
This isn't really a visual thing, but it's because card. I mean, it already sounds like card. I was just thinking like carda, like instead of carta, it's just carda, and it's just like
Okay. Okay. So we associated the word card with cart with card.
yeah.
Okay, that's fair. You could use logic to remember this. So what we talked before, that would work. But for some in the future when we use like memory palace, here's the thing: the visualization methods work for everything, but logic and the blind methods they don't necessarily work for everything. So visualization is really works for everything. If you really are not afraid of using your memory, it works for everything. But the blind method not necessarily. So that's why I want you guys to think of ways to implement only visualization. So okay, so all these ideas are good. You can imagine, let's say, a postal letter riding a cart. You could imagine a cart running over a postal letter. Imagine the postal letter is actually has eyes and a mouth and a face like a cartoon, and the cart's running over and it's screaming, it's dying, and it's crying, and that's emotional. You can imagine all types of weird things. You can imagine that you are driving the car and you are running over the postal letter or postal letter. So anything that's weird, bizarre works, but it needs to be bizarre and emotional for you. So if it's not for me, it doesn't matter. or if it's for me and it's not for you, it doesn't matter. It needs to be for those who, if it needs to be memorable for who is memorizing. So if it is weird for me, that's what matters. If it's something that brings emotions to you, that's what matters. Let's move on to new ones. So we have I cannot pronounce that. And so who here knows German? Raise their hands. Someone here knows German, does not want to raise their hand. But okay, so here's the thing. I cannot pronounce that word, but that means parachute. But it sounds like Fallschirm. It's wrong, but like it's close enough. So let's try to memorize that. So you want to remember the meaning of this word. It sounds like Fallschirm, and it means parachute. So how are you gonna memorize that? Give you guys 10 seconds. An image that involves parachute and Fallschirm. Okay, Shaswa. A falling mushroom.
Because the shroom part sounds like shroom,
Uh-huh.
and a mushroom looks like a parachute that's bent before.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so you said a mushroom falling?
Yeah, a falling mushroom.
A falling
See how
mushroom.
the top of the mushroom is kind of like a parachute?
Uh-huh.
So the falling mushroom, parachute.
Okay, that's good. So, okay, that's fair. Okay, a falling mushroom. Mushroom sounds like the shroom sounds like the end of the part. Yeah. Any other ideas? Sure.
I thought of a shrimp skydiving, so that way it's falling, and
Uh-huh.
then when it gets close to the ground, it'll deploy a parachute.
Okay, a shrimp skydiving and using the parachute. Yeah. Any other ideas? Any other ideas? I like them. I like both of them. So that's something easier to use. Let's go to livre in French, which means book, but sounds like leaf. So um, so yeah, 10 seconds for it to do that. Ideas. Sure.
I was sitting on a leaf reading a book.
A what?
Sitting on a leaf, right?
Sitting on a leaf.
A leaf, right?
Uh-huh.
I was reading a book.
Sitting on a leaf, reading a book. Anything else? Sure.
A book made of leaves.
A book made of leaves. Nice. What else? So yeah, you could imagine a leaf reading a book as well. You could memorize, let's say, a leaf eating a book. I would probably imagine something like that: a leaf eating a book, like as if it was a person and had a mouth and it's eating a book. For the fortune, I would probably imagine I could imagine like a parachute skydiving with a parachute made of shrimps, which is kind of it's pretty much anything. But yeah, actually, a shrimp skydiving that also works. I would probably imagine the shrimp like yelling and screaming like it was like in a movie, like it's an agent, and it's like and it's exploding in the background. But this method of associate memorize foreign words is known as the keyword method. Okay, so you pick the word the way it sounds, pick the meaning, create an image for each one of them, and you connect them. Got the idea? You just convert the word and meaning and connect. So how are you gonna come up with those words? Well, you just ask yourself, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? And now we're gonna work with that right now, because now we're gonna memorize names and faces. So how are you gonna memorize names? So if you get to know a lot of people and you want to remember their names and you want to use methods for that, I'm gonna teach you guys the main idea of how you can do this. So here, for us to memorize names using visualization, we need to associate the person or some characteristic trait of them, maybe of their face or their body, to their name. So let's say you need to remember the person's name is Harry. Okay, you just met someone today. Their name's Harry. So what you need to remember, it's their name and associate that to their face or their body or like who they are. So you ask yourself, what is the first thing that Harry reminds you of? Say out loud. Harry Potter. Okay, that's also what it reminds me of. So that reminds me of, this name reminds me of Harry Potter. And let's suppose that the most conspicuous trait they have is that they have a big nose. So that's something you got to ask yourself. You're going to look at them and you're going to be like, what is the first thing that this person, that is the most visible thing, most visible trait? And that's why you should not tell people your images. So how are you going to create an image with this person's nose and Harry Potter? So I'm going to give you guys, imagine you just met someone. So they have a big nose and their name is Harry. So I'm going to give you guys 10 seconds to create an image involving their big nose and Harry Potter. What did you guys think? Jesus. That was very funny. Yes. So okay, it's Voldemort's biggest enemy. That's great. That's actually very good. I was thinking of an image though. That's logic. That's logic. Like, but that's very good. That's a very good logic. But how are you gonna memorize that it's that person? No, I got your idea. So that's a lot of logic. But when I say associating the person to the trait, is like imagining the person, and associate their name in the same environment. So you're still gonna imagine the person in the same image. Sure. You could imagine Harry Potter with a big nose. So okay, that works. But again, I think my instructions maybe were unclear. I thought it would be understood, but I think it was kind of unclear. So the idea is that you can imagine Harry Potter with a big nose, but when you see that person again, it's not necessarily going to be as easy to remember. Sure. Okay, you could imagine them, the person with the lightning scar. Okay, but I wanted something that's more, that's funnier, that's weirder.
You know, like you can say somebody's hairy. Let's say, for example,
Okay.
the hairy as hairy.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's good.
Hairy.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Harry sounds like Harry of being having a lot of hair. So you could imagine the person you just met with a lot of hair. I would, if you are gonna imagine that, I would recommend you to imagine a lot of hair, like really a lot. The person's just growing hair. It's so hairy. It's like crazily hairy, like insanely hairy. It's just growing out of control. So you can just make it cartoonish. Sure, you had an idea.
Well, this is like also kind of specific to hair.
Mhm.
But if they have like a big nose, people have nose hairs. And
Okay.
sometimes you have bigger nose, like you can see people's nose hairs, and so I would probably focus on that. But that really depends on if the guy has a hairy nose.
Okay, but here's the thing: you could still imagine, think of the person's nose hair, and you just, the image doesn't need to be true to reality. You can make it cartoonish. Remember the principles of visualization. So you're gonna imagine the person, and you want to, they have a conspicuous nose, and you want to remember their name. So you can just imagine the person, and imagine that they have so much hair in their nose, and it's like so much, it's falling, it's entering their mouth, it's going everywhere. It's like a beard, it's growing out of control. If I were gonna memorize that, I would, what the image I would have created is just that I would close my not necessarily close my eyes, but I would imagine the person, this the person I just met, the Harry, and I'm gonna ask myself, what does Harry remind me of? Well, Harry Potter. So, what is the most conspicuous thing of this person? Their nose. They have a big nose. So, what can I imagine? I can imagine this person is sniffing Harry Potter inside their nose, like, and just getting Harry Potter. Just they have. You can make it as a cartoon drawing. You make a caricature of the person. So in your imagination, you just let it go, just let it be, let it get distorted. So just imagine that, well, they have a big nose. You increase their nose by like 100 times, and then they just go and Harry Potter is gone and it's inside them. So that's something your brain would never see ever. You're never gonna be walking down the street and you're gonna see just someone else. That's never gonna happen. But everything's possible in your memory, in your mind, in your imagination. So let it go weirdly and strangely. And here, as the background, you should imagine the place where you met each other. That makes it easier. So that's just a tip. So I would imagine that happening. I would meet Harry. I would imagine the sight of them like Harry Potter, and in the place where we met. So when I try to recall their name, I'm gonna have these two triggers to help me recall the name. So when I see that person again, I'm gonna look at them and like, oh, what is their name? Well, they have a big nose. What did I imagine that with that? Oh, where do we meet? Did we meet? And then I'm gonna remember the place. I'm gonna remember that I created an image related to nose, and that's gonna help me recall the image. So let's do some exercises now. So we have these people, and we are gonna create images. So let's go. I'm gonna give you guys some time, and let's go. I'm gonna give you guys some time to create your images. So let's do the first one only. First, let's do like we do the first one, finish it, create the image, and all of that, and then we move on. Like 10 seconds. Any ideas?
We'll go ahead. So since he's bald, I was thinking of like George Washington, and I was thinking like someone can just smack on like a George Washington wig on his head,
Okay.
something like that.
Okay. So he's bald. You can imagine someone smacking a George Washington wig on his head. That is okay. You can visualize that. And as the background, you should imagine like the place where you guys met. Sure. Any other ideas? Go ahead.
I also focused on the bald thing, and so
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking like, oh, bald, like, oh, he's a criminal because all bald people. And so then I was imagining him like a mug. This is like his mug shot. So then the bars of his like, I mean, like the container thing, like like hold the sign and like the thing spells out like George.
Okay. But how did you remember that it's gonna be George?
Because that's what it says like on the placard.
But when you try to remember it later.
I'm not gonna forget this guy. This is his third like larceny charge. This is really serious. This guy is.
Okay. I think you could go deeper and try to encode the word George as well. Like ask yourself what George reminds you of. You see my idea? Because if you try to remember a lot of names and you just imagine them written, it's gonna be hard. But I do like the idea of the criminal part. So if that's a connection to you, that works perfectly. You had an idea as well to memorize this one. No, you.
I had a couple ideas.
Okay, is it something that's gonna put the video down? That's good. I'm glad. But tell me the one I can post.
Sure. Jumping off your thing, you were stating it kind of looks like the guy from Curious George, but he just went to jail.
He looks like what?
The guy from Curious George.
Yeah,
the guy with the yellow. It kind of looks like him, but like he's in jail and he's very disappointed.
Okay, he looks like the guy from Curious George. So, okay, all these are ideas. If I were trying to remember this, I would ask myself the first thing, what does the word George remind me of? It reminds me of Curious George. What does this person and what is conspicuous about this person? The fact that they are bald. So I could imagine Curious George licking their head, just licking all their head. And that's weird enough. And you can imagine like George is trying to eat their head off. They're in a deep fight and they're fighting against each other. George doesn't let George go away. It's George against George. Who's gonna kill who? And it's like they're just trying to survive. I mean, this George, the other George is trying to kill him. So you can imagine something weird like that. But yeah, great ideas. So now let's move on to the next one. So you look at the name, you ask yourself, what does this name remind me of? Look at the person, try to think, what does this person remind me of, and you try to connect them. You can also imagine just the person as well. You don't need to necessarily use something that the person reminds you of. Like you don't need necessarily to use. See, so in this case, I use the feature that's most conspicuous, but that's not a necessity all the time. But it's always good for you to do that. Okay, so to use something that's conspicuous, that's memorable about them. But yeah, let's go ahead. I'm gonna give you guys 10 seconds. Time's up. What do you guys think of? Any ideas? Any ideas? Sure.
Well, I was just noticed like her hair is kind of the first thing I noticed.
Okay.
And there's a character Bea in Duolingo who used to have hair like hers, and then there's this massive controversy in like 2017 because she like the devs like tied up Bea's hair and it's like an afro now, and like everyone was freaking out over it for some reason. And so I don't know why I just thought of that. But
Okay. Did you get to connect with the name?
Beatrice.
Yeah.
Is Bea short for Beatrice?
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. I see the idea. Okay. Again, but that's logic because you're not necessarily visualizing it. Like you're not creating an image that you can put like it's not an image that you can put anywhere. For instance, it is fine to use that idea. But when we get to the memory palace method, you will need to have a single image for you to put in the memory palace, in each position of the memory palace. You see? So if you want to memorize like 10 names or 50 names in order, you need to like have an image for each one, for each, an image representing the name for each one of them. You see? Like you put in each position. So you can have the whole list. But that works. Like if you're just getting to know someone, that works perfectly. Sure.
So there's rice and eat. So and rice is white, right?
Mhm.
So can kind of make some connections between rice and something like that. Yeah, like I want to make a connection with the teeth because they're so white. Beatrice with teeth like rice, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I can see it in the name as well, connected to the teeth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will throw some ideas in there as well. So we think of the name like Beatrice. I also thought of rice, and we can actually divide that, and we have like beet rice. So what I would think of is like this woman beating rice. So I imagine like a rice, a grain of rice, and it's like human size, and she's beating the rice. She's beating the rice. She's fighting against the rice. So Beatrice beat rice. So that's cartoonish. That would be enough for me, I think. That's one idea. So I didn't associate exactly to any of her features, but in my image, I'm imagining her. You see what I mean? So that could be helpful already. That could be enough already to remember the thing. but it's always better to associate to some feature. So yeah, if you guys can do like, you could do the reverse. So for some people, the most memorable thing about her was the hair. So you could imagine Rice beating her instead, and imagine beating using the hair against her. So you could do this type of association, um, so that you have a conspicuous trait of the person and associate to the meaning of their name, or the what their name reminds you of. So let's move on to the second to last person. You have 10 seconds. So you have the name of the person. Now we have a surname too. So it's gonna get harder. We have 10 seconds. Okay, time's up. Any ideas? Any ideas? No ideas?
Which one? The last one?
The second to last one, this one.
Auntie Anne.
Aunt Anne.
Yeah, Auntie Anne. Like because she looks old and like an aunt, so I'm like Auntie Anne. The moment I just put that in my head, that Auntie Anne, I'm going to make me remember more. I don't know.
Okay.
Auntie Anne. Just putting that aunt.
Okay.
It's also connected to your figurative expression.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
She's looking like Auntie Anne.
Okay. Fair.
Or
Did you?
Or Granny Anne. But
Granny Anne. Okay. Do you have an image for that?
Yeah, image.
Okay. Okay. Any other ideas?
I was thinking of her as a butler, and she's like distorted in the shape of the letter N.
Okay.
And butler. And
Okay, that's good. That's good. I like that. So you imagine her as a butler, and distorted as the letter N. So Anne Butler. That's very good. That's very good. I'll throw some ideas as well. Any other ideas you want to share? So Anne, like, reminds me of aunt. And butler, yeah, I can imagine like a butler. So I could imagine a bunch of things. You could also imagine like butter. So you could imagine a gigantic ant spreading butter on her hair, all over her hair, and like spreading it all over her head. I'll probably imagine something like that. I think, or maybe, a bunch of ants crawling on her hair and spreading butter all over. Anything weird like that. But yeah, there are many ideas. So let's move on to the last one. I'll give you guys some like 10 seconds or 15 seconds. Let's do 15. Any ideas so far? Or do you guys want more time? I'll give you one idea here. So Carlton Scott. So I would ask myself, what does Carlton remind me of? I would say, well, Carl. Carl, the name Carl. And also Scott reminds me of scooter. So that's for me. So I would probably think of that. Now, what image can I create with that? Carl and scooter. I'll give you guys 10 seconds to think of that.
On a scooter.
But you need to associate to this guy. So, any ideas of how to make up that image? Any ideas? Sure.
1 ton of Carl Weezer is all trying to like fit themselves onto the scooter.
Okay. But how do you associate that to that guy?
Well, there's a ton of Carls, so Carlton on the scooter.
You imagine the same. Oh, okay.
Like Carl Weezer, like the guy. I don't know.
And how do you associate to this guy, to their appearance? That's my point.
Yeah.
So, and I, huh?
They could be running him over.
They could be running him over. Yes, you could imagine some Carl driving a scooter and running over this guy. Okay. Let's think. Well, in this case, you could say, you could also associate this to some conspicuous feature of this guy. Like when you think of him, what is the most conspicuous thing for you? Maybe it's the beard, maybe it's the nose, maybe it's the glasses. But if you can think of something specifically, you can use that to create the image. So in this case, you could imagine some Carl you already know, hitting a scooter on his beard. Or if it's the nose, you could imagine hitting a scooter on his nose, and the nose deflects the scooter and protects him. You can use anything like that and associate in this way. So you can use like both movement and weirdness and cartoonish way. Everybody sees how that could play. So I know I'm introducing this, and this is like a new way of thinking. So I know it can be hard to think of images, and I want to like feed you guys other possibilities of thinking. So eventually you guys can think of anything, basically. But these are some of the ideas that I gave. But yeah, let's move on to memorization of formulas. So if you have to memorize like formulas for math. So the first thing that I want to mention is that formulas are usually learned so that you can apply them, and you need to have some familiarity with them anyways. So if you just memorize them, that's not necessarily enough. That's why bringing cheat sheets for an exam is not the solution for everything. You're not going to get 100 just because you brought a cheat sheet. But the purpose of the memorization is just that you don't forget one detail or another. So you don't forget that an x is to the square, not to the cube, just small details. So that's why you should memorize only the parts that you have difficulty with. You don't need to memorize the whole formula. If you want to remember a whole formula, you can memorize just parts of it. So, for instance, let's say you have the area of a circle. So we have a equals pi times r squared. If you can remember that the pi is in the formula, you can remember the pi. If you can remember the pi, then you can create an image that associates both. So you can imagine you need to associate that this is about the circle, and you need to associate that to pi. So how could you do that? Any ideas?
A pie in a circle.
A pie in a circle. Okay, exactly. Yeah, I would think of something like that as well. I would think like a pizza pie or a circle. Yeah. So I would probably think of that. So pie sounds like pie as the food. So let's do an exercise, a quick exercise. So the idea is that you pick something that you cannot remember well and associate that to the formula. So here we have area of a circle. So you can imagine a circle or something that's circular, and associate that to what you're having trouble remembering. So here we have this exercise, the Pythagorean theorem. A squared equals B squared times C squared. What if you're having trouble remembering that they are all squared? So how can you associate how can you remember this? I'll give you guys like 10 seconds. How can you associate the Pythagorean theorem with squared? Like, how do I connect these two ideas? I'll give you guys like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Any ideas? What do you guys think of? Sure.
Like I just do it like a square here. So like Pythagoras theorem is coming from like a square divided in half with the diagonal line.
Mhm.
So yeah, before because I've mentioned the word square, right?
Mhm.
So obviously when I'm now defining it in terms of letters and numbers, I have that in mind.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
So I just have A equal to beta C square.
Okay. And square. So imagine like a square. Let's think of something weird, like something more, yeah, weird, cartoonish. So I'll give you guys some ideas. So you ask yourself, the Pythagorean theorem. What does that remind you of? Well, for me, for instance, if an image that could be used to represent that is Pythagoras. I could imagine just that I've never met him, but like I can get an image in my head of him, and I need to remember associate him with being squared, right? And how can I do that? So, you can imagine that his face is a square. He has a square face, or something like that. Do you guys see the? So you're creating an image to represent the name of the theorem or what it represents, and the idea is that the meaning is going to be inbuilt in the image. Another example is that let's say you can remember that the hypotenuse is the isolated term. So I'm gonna give you guys 10 to 15 seconds to think about that. So try to ask yourself, try to follow this process. I need to remember hypotenuse is isolated. So these are the two facts I have to remember. Hypotenuse and isolation. So how can I imagine or visualize the hypotenuse? What image I can use for that? And how can I visualize being isolated? So think about that. 10, 15 seconds. I'll give a little bit more time, actually. Any ideas? Sure.
A hippopotamus,
Mhm.
like living in a deserted river or
Okay. Yeah, nice, nice. Yeah, hippopotamus living in a deserted river. Yeah, that works. Yeah, I also thought of hippopotamus for hypotenuse. Any other ideas? I think other people had ideas, but they don't want to say out loud. But I also thought of a hippopotamus. So I would probably imagine like a hippopotamus crying in a corner, like so sad and just weeping, and like, oh, I'm so isolated and so sad. And like imagine the emotion of the hippopotamus. It's so sad. And yeah, basically I think you guys got the idea, the logic of it. So the idea is really that it's with a lot of practice you can come up with images. And when you come up with an image in the beginning, um, what matters the most is whether or not you can remember the image later. Okay, so that's what tells that the image is good. But when you're creating the image, ask yourself, how can I make this weirder? If you can think of a way to make it weirder, that's better. Okay, so if you can make it weirder, make it weirder. So when you finish your image, ask yourself, how can I make this weird? And how can I make this funny? Or how can I make this more intense, more emotional? So let's move on to the next part, which is remembering appointments. So we can also use visualization to remember appointments. So this is going to be the final application of today. So all the previous cases that we studied today were cases where we needed to we would recall the content voluntarily. But for an appointment, we need to recall involuntarily. So we're just living our lives, and all of a sudden we recall the thing. So we need the notification, right? The other cases, we would recall by ourselves. We'd be like, what is the name of this person? What is that formula with that name? So we would have that trigger. But in this case, you're just living your life, and all of a sudden your brain needs to come up with a notification in your head. And how do you create that? So we're gonna do a step-by-step process so that you can memorize appointments as well using the system. So the first thing is that you create an image for the event. And that's the first point, okay? The second point is that you choose a place you will pass through before the time you will need to complete the task. So that's the moment you're gonna be notified. So it's when you're gonna choose a place you're gonna pass through before you have to do that task, and that's gonna be the moment that the alarm is gonna ring. Let's say you associate these both images, the place and the image for the event, and the point is that the image should pop up when you go to that place later. So as an example, let's imagine you need to remember to take the trash outside. So you're going to sleep, but you need to remember, oh, I need to take the trash outside tomorrow morning, and I cannot forget this. So what are the things you could imagine? So trash, you need to associate trash and associate that to some place you're going to pass through in the morning tomorrow. It'll give you guys like 10, 15 seconds to think of that, to apply this step-by-step process. Any questions? Anybody did not understand this idea? Any questions? No? So I'm going to move on. I'm going to give it the time. So you guys can start already. So associate trash or an image that reminds you of a trash and someplace that you're going to pass through in the morning. Make it funny, make it weird. If you can make it emotional, make it emotional. When you finish your image, ask yourself, how can I make this weird? How can I make this cartoonish? How can I give more interaction or movement? Ideas? Sure.
I should chase George out of my house because he talks trash, something like that tomorrow. Can kind of connect that. That I've given George enough chances. So, because he talks trash, I'm going to chase him out of my house tomorrow. Something like that.
Okay. So what would the image be?
Like me, like taking maybe like George out of my house, right?
Okay.
Tomorrow, something like that. Something that somebody I already live with or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If he talks trash giving you enough chances. I'm giving you enough chances, and
Mhm.
you're out of my house tomorrow morning. I want
Okay.
you out of my house.
Okay. Okay. Anybody thought of something? Sure.
I think like when you wake up, you go to the bathroom. So
Yeah.
Disgusting bathroom covered.
Okay. Nice. I like it. Also, raise your hand.
The trash next to the water fountain, so imagine yourself filling my bottle with dirty water.
Okay. So, okay, the trash is next to the water fountain, so you can imagine filling your water bottle with trash. Okay. I like these ideas as well. Imagine, okay, your bathroom is full of trash, so you go to your bathroom in the morning. You're gonna remember the trash. I would probably think of something related to either the bathroom or kitchen as well. If it was like my house, like before college, I would probably imagine like um, a big trash as if it was a human, like as a cartoonish thing, and just a trashing the whole kitchen, just destroying everything. Like a trash monster destroying everything. And when I got to the kitchen, I would just I would remember, oh, the trash monster image. I need to take the trash out. So the idea is that you create this image, you put in a place you're gonna pass through, and when you get to that place in the morning, you will remember the image. That's the goal of this idea. So I recommend you guys to try to implement this. So here's the thing: this method may fail sometimes, but it gets better the more you use it. So the more often you use it, the better it gets. So if, for instance, right now I'm not using the system, and if I try to use it again, I'll probably fail the first times. But then when you keep using it, it starts to get better again. So this is like more of a fun exercise for you guys to use. So it's not fail proof, but it is a fun thing for you to practice the idea of creating images. So when you have tasks in your calendar, try to do this. Try to create these images, these weird images with with your imagination, and then you pass through that place, you're gonna remember the image. So the more you use it, the more um, the more effective it's gonna be. So I find it more effective when the place I'm imagining is very similar to how I'm gonna look at it. So one problem that this system may have is that, for instance, sometimes I would imagine I needed to do something right after class, and this is like back in high school and or middle school, no, high school, and then I would imagine something right next to the door. But when the class ended and I was going to leave, in my imagination, I had imagined an image of a clean class without anybody, and I was imagining the image with empty people. I was not imagining myself talking to people and the image there. So when I was leaving the class, I was usually like, the class ended, and I would go and I would talk to my friends, and then I would not remember the image because the image doesn't look the way I thought of. So places like bathrooms and things like that, they look more consistent, right? But the end of class, you don't know how it's going to be. Maybe someone or your friend's going to talk to you. Maybe you're going to talk to the professor, whatever happens. So it's the better you can, to make this better, the system better, is that you imagine your visualization of the place needs to be as similar to what you're going to see in the real life as possible. And then the weird element of it is going to be what you have to remember. So you're going to see the place as it is in the image, and then that's going to trigger the weird image that you thought of that relates to the task. Any questions about this, of this logic? Can everybody understand? I recommend you guys to try this. So you guys have a bunch of systems that I taught you guys today. So how to memorize formulas, how to memorize names, how to remember appointments. And now you can already start